Hello, global gardeners. Are you ready for August to begin? This is the last day of July. Can you believe it that our gardening season is fading? And some of us are just now beginning our harvest. And so today I wanted to talk about harvesting, growing, middle of the season, end of the season, and not just with my garden. Let's do some discussion, some conversation, some tips, some advice from not quite the other side of the planet, but as far as I can think of, Scotland is thousands of miles away. So I'm welcoming Eli back to the show from In the Garden with Eli and Kate. And we're going to be talking gardening and answering as many of your questions as we can. Hi, Eli.
Hello, from the other side of the world.
Yeah. Well, it's the other side of the ocean or the other side of the pond.
Yeah,
It's not quite the other side of
it's slightly
the
over and
world.
up a bit.
It's over and up. Yeah, it's just a hop, skip, and a jump, right?
Or, as everyone knows, you're just over the fence. We're fooling nobody.
That's right. So many of you, I know, have seen the videos that Eli and Kate, or Eli and I, along with Kate, have done in the past this year. We have a series of videos where we're talking about our tomato growing. And so I thought today we would go ahead and start talking about the tomatoes. This background that I have today is my garden. I took the picture today. Yesterday I was out doing some serious pruning on the tomatoes behind me. They're looking great. They're beautiful. I love growing outside in my raised beds because my tomatoes do so great. And what are you discovering with your raised beds?
I'm enjoying it. I'm really enjoying it because it's different. The plants grow differently outside than in my greenhouse. And oh, actually, this is top secret stuff. I haven't shared this yet, so you guys don't tell anyone, right? Secrets. But yeah, little things like sweet millions. So I've grown them for years in the greenhouse. And I've seen the photographs online of other people with the enormous trusses of tomatoes. And I have never had that until this year in the raised beds. And I've got trusses that are about 3 foot long. So
Wow.
I'm loving just learning how different it all is. So yeah, it's quite exciting.
That's a good example because they do grow differently in different locations. Now, in your greenhouse, you grow in containers exclusively, right?
Yes. Hmm.
And so that I think that's a big part of when we grow tomatoes. If we give them the opportunity to grow their roots, they're going to give us those big plants with the big trusses of the tomatoes, and they feel limited, as though they feel, but they're
I'm
limited
sure
when
they
they
do.
grow in a container.
Well, this is the thing because of the type of container system I grow in the greenhouse. So it's not quite hydroponics, and it has got a fancy name. And I can't remember it now, but the plants get all of the nutrition and all of the water from a reservoir that's under them. So I have so much success because they're being fed constantly when they need it. I get massive harvests, huge plants, but still I'm noticing differences with the ones that are outdoors, even though I did cram them in a bit closer than they should be. But still, the difference is quite weird. So I'm loving just finding these things out.
Good, good. Glad to hear that. Here's a question from Shandy's Garden. As far as global gardening, does it make a difference where you get your seeds? I get them from everywhere, but sometimes germination isn't perfect. Should they shop closer to home? I know I don't get seeds from the UK and you don't get seeds from the US, but how do
Oh,
you
I do.
approach? Oh, do you? Do you actually
Yeah,
order from the US?
I do indeed. I get bits and pieces from um, Brad. Not Brad. See, I've gone blank now because you put me in the spot.
Oh, sorry.
Um, I get my Brad's Atomic,
Johnny's?
my Barry's Crazy Cherry, and
Oh,
all that straight from source.
oh, okay.
Um, so you can now get them here, but for us guys, I mean, we're just like everyone that watches our channels. We watch other YouTubers and get excited about things they do. So for a while, we couldn't get those kind of crazy tomatoes over here, so we were having to get them from the States. So yeah, mostly I get from the UK, but
Have you noticed a difference in the seed from the ones that you get in the UK to those that you get from the States as far as how well the plant grows?
I think it more depends on the company you use rather than where sort of physically on the globe you get them.
Yeah, I think I would second that. I've had seeds from Canada and the U.S. and honestly, I haven't seen a difference in the germination rates as
No.
long as you're getting them from a good company. So
Yeah,
um, it could be. Now, I do prefer to shop local to try to get
yeah,
seeds
if you can.
near me if I can. But you're right. If there's a variety that I'm looking for, you're not going to find it at the big box store down the street that has the same seeds across the
Mhm.
country that everybody has access to. And so sometimes you do have to order. And I have noticed some of those more unique seeds from some of those smaller producers aren't necessarily as high germination rates. And I think that sometimes and a lot of the big seed companies have started this way. It's a mom and pop operation.
Yeah,
They harvest seeds in their backyard. They're not doing viability tests. They're just harvesting the seeds and putting them out. But if you buy from a big company, I showed that in the video where I visited Baker Creek Seeds. They do viability tests on every batch of seeds that they have. And so even though I've had some germination issues with Baker Creek Seeds, for the most part, there shouldn't be a big issue. And it's the same across the board with all the seed companies. The big companies are doing the viability tests so that the germination rates will be
mhm.
good.
I mean, I think it's the same here. There's a good 4 or 5 big names that everybody knows where you can get your stuff. But it's kind of becoming more known that we know they all get their seeds from the same place, not just repackaged.
Yeah.
So it's like you're getting the same seeds regardless of who you get them from, unless you go to a little local supplier.
Yep. That's a good point. And I even noticed this year with some of the seeds I saved that same issue. If you're saving your own seeds and then planting them, you shouldn't expect 100% germination. But I often get it. But I did have some of the things I tried this year that I didn't get the germination from my own seeds.
I've not
And
been bad this year actually. Touch wood.
yeah, good, good. So let's talk about those Oasis boxes that we're each using in our greenhouse. And you made a comment in an email the other day. So what are you thinking? So you do the container growing with the
Yeah.
reservoirs, and
Mhm.
so we're trying the new box. What's your
Yeah, so it's
thought?
the first time for both of us. So I've got 2 systems in the greenhouse. One that I have been using for I think about 7 or 8 years now. I absolutely love it. It's fantastic. It's 4 pots on top of a reservoir with capillary mat to use as the wick. It's fantastic. These new Oasis boxes that we're trying don't have that wicking. They rely on the soil or the compost being
Right.
the wick, which is completely different. I don't know how you're finding, but obviously because I've got this other very, very similar system, I can compare between the two. And I am noticing the plants in the Oasis boxes are much smaller, much paler, and I'm noticing they don't really seem to take up the water. I'm hardly watering at all, which is just not what I'm used to. It's very strange.
I'm glad you said that because
You feel
mine
better now.
because mine are kind of pale and they're not growing as well as I would think they should. I've had to fertilize a couple times where I wouldn't normally have fertilized, thinking that might help. But it is so dry and my greenhouse is so hot that I've actually had to water more than I would have anticipated. The reservoir actually has gone dry a couple times unexpectedly because it
Okay.
dries, but the top inch or two of my soil is dry. And so
Yeah.
my conditions are just so dry. And this is one reason why I don't typically use the self-watering containers is because I've discovered this before that the top is always dry, which wicks all the moisture up trying to replenish that moisture. And then it drains the reservoir and I end up with dry soil on the top and the bottom, which is not good for the
It's
plant. So
not ideal, no.
I'm actually continuing now to water my containers from above at the same time I water the other plants in the greenhouse,
Yeah.
and that seems to be working for me.
Yeah. See, that's not something I've ever had to worry about. I wish I could show you just now, but it is just so wet at the moment. The greenhouse is all fogged up. Dry is not an issue for me.
It's we I think for a number of weeks now, we typically late in the afternoon we'll have the clouds come over. We might get a thunderstorm, but no rain to speak of, no humidity to speak of. It's all just dry. So, but we're still getting our tomatoes.
Yeah. We had that little swap early in the year where we swapped weathers for a few weeks just so we could see what it was like for the other one.
Yeah,
But
so
yeah, back to normal.
in those videos that we did, we talked about our different weather and the problems we anticipated. And mine is the hot, dry weather. And Eli was talking about the cool, wet weather. And then all of a sudden, June comes, and it was the complete opposite. You had beautiful, warm, hot, dry days, and
We had
I
heat
had
waves.
cool, wet. Yeah.
We were the
And that-
hottest we have ever been on record.
And now we're back to
Yeah,
normal.
back to normal.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was 17C today, so I know you've got your little chart to convert for me.
Yeah, so 17 is 63 degrees Fahrenheit.
And we were commenting
That's
how lovely
cool.
warm it was.
Oh, wow. Yeah, see, we have been up in the range of 32C, around 90 degrees for weeks now. It's supposed to cool a few degrees here a little bit later in the week, but it's actually been quite different. I've actually had humidity that's close to 30%, which is actually high for me for this time of year. So,
Yeah, I don't even know what that must feel like. We're up over 90.
that's just crazy. I want to give a shout out to Riverdale Gardens. That's River and Dale on their way to Niagara Falls.
Ooh.
And that's fantastic. They're obviously listening on the way. So hello to River and Dale. Enjoy that. That's one of those things. Eli and I were talking a little bit about me being in the Air Force before we signed on today. And that's one of my wonderful memories. When I was stationed up in northern Maine, north of the typical border we think of where Canada is. I mean, we were like literally spitting distance from Canada. And the program I was in when I was a co-pilot allowed us to basically check out a jet and go fly somewhere. And it was like a little roadster, just two pilots. And for training purposes, we would just take these jets and fly them around the country. And I went once with another guy in the program, and we flew to New York. And if you know the right language, you can ask the air traffic controllers for the route that puts you over Niagara Falls as you're going to go into the airport in Buffalo, New York. And what that really means is just fly directly over the falls and do circles and just enjoy it. So I've never actually been to Niagara Falls, but I've flown over it close enough to actually get the water mist on my windscreen. So
Yeah, that would be so cool.
yeah, it was. That's
We
why
don't
everybody
have
should
anything
join the
that
Air
fucking
Force.
exciting here.
That's
Really,
funny.
that's the reason to join the Air Force.
That's the reason to join the Air Force, to do that. So, okay, I'm going to go ahead and scroll down, see if we've got some questions. Bill Willdog82 says, I have DIY wicking beds in 27 and 55 gallon totes, and with addition of straw on top, my peppers, tomatoes, and carrots are strong. So there you go. That is one of those things that, and I think that's a big reason why the Oasis is not working, because it's a cone.
Mm-hmm. It's small.
And it's small. And so if I were growing in a 27 or 55 gallon tote, that's a lot of soil. That helps the whole environment stay moist. And I think that's a big part of it is your other boxes have more soil, right? There's more space for those roots to grow.
Yeah, so the other one, it's 15 litre pots. But I have noticed, and I know new gardeners using this system always contact me in a panic because the tomatoes will grow through the wicking matting. They'll go through the holes into the reservoir. So, they'll take over. There's 2 pots on a 15-litre reservoir, and then they're connected together, and they will fill that up with roots. They'll find their way.
Yeah, and if you give them more room to grow and all the nutrients they need, they will do well. So, it's not a surprise that, and with the straw on top, I think the mulch is important. I normally mulch all of my containers. So I'm growing some tomatoes in some 5-gallon buckets on my deck, and I've got a straw mulch on that. I intentionally am not mulching those boxes in the greenhouse so that I can see how much water they're taking up or not taking up.
Which is the thing, when you're doing experiments, you've got to do these little things so that you can monitor stuff. So it's not like a normal situation.
Exactly. So I completely agree with the way that Big Will Dog is doing it, is bigger totes with the straw on top. And yes, you can definitely expect to have good results if you take that approach. The smaller containers, they just don't work for the big plants. I think those boxes may be good for lettuce and some of the smaller salad crops, but for a big rooted plant, like you said, that wants to grow down into the wick, the small just isn't better. So we'll just.
But we're trying it. We'll see.
But
maybe we'll get an end of season spurt. You never know.
So I saw that you had tasted one of your Berries Crazy cherries. Tell us about, because mine's close. I'll probably pick my first one in the next couple days. What did you think of that as a new variety that we're both trying?
I quite liked it. It was quite nice. Not a particularly powerful flavour. So I quite like the acidic tomatoes.
Okay.
And I found it was quite a mild tomato. So that was the first of all of my tomatoes to ripen. But funnily enough, I got maybe 3 or 4, and I haven't had any more since. There are a lot on the plant, but they're not ripe. Whereas my gold nugget outdoors has got an entire truss of ripe tomatoes. Okay. So that was the first outdoor tomato to ripen. Okay. And with them, here's another one. This is part of I'm so excited at things I'm learning. So I told you that last year I tried some little tomato plants outdoors, my very first experiment. But I found all the tomatoes tasted really watery and not a lot of flavour. So I was a bit worried about doing this. So I've got gold nugget in, what we call cloth pots, you guys call grow bags. Mm-hmm. I've got one in the raised bed, so I can compare because they're both ripening. And I've actually noticed the plant that's in the grow bag, the cloth pots, those tomatoes were slightly watery tasting compared to the ones that were in the raised bed. So differences just between the 2 ways of growing them. But still, I hate to say it, the tomatoes outdoors aren't quite as wow as the ones from the greenhouse.
They're not quite as what?
Wow, just the impact of the flavour.
Oh, wow.
It's not quite as big, yeah.
Wow, I wasn't familiar with that gardening term. Okay. That's a new gardening term. I don't often get a lot of wow in my garden. I get a lot more of aww.
Oh. No, so it's so interesting finding out all these different things.
Okay. My tomato, and you can see it in my recent greenhouse video, my tomato plant growing in the ground in my greenhouse is just doing great. It's a couple black cherries, and I've been harvesting every day for days now. And, the greenhouse itself is a great way to grow. It's as we've been talking, finding the right container, or in my case, in the ground, is the hard part about the greenhouse growing.
I guess for you, with the heat and the humidity and stuff, growing in the ground in the greenhouse makes much more sense because, it's a much bigger expanse to hold water. The plants can go where they need to find the water. Whereas for you in a pot, this is a big challenge for you this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to interject. Looks like Cheesecake and Betty Barnes are having a conversation about garlic bulbs, and that there's a YouTuber that suggests keeping garlic bulbs in a brown bag and keep it in the fridge, do you think it's a good idea?
Your fridge has got moisture in it. So, just put all that effort into drying the bulbs out so they'll store.
Yeah, yeah. I think, and so uh, I completely agree that if you're harvesting the garlic and trying to season it,
Mhm.
you know, I try to lay my garlic out on the surface of my bed on top of the straw mulch for 2 or 3 days, a little bit longer if it can handle that. That really helps get that paper around the garlic to harden. But when I get my afternoon thunderstorms, usually during the garlic harvest time, I just bring them indoors and set them on top of newspaper, but in the regular open air. Putting them in the refrigerator, you're right. There's a lot of moisture in the refrigerator, and it's not going to do that garlic well right away.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it all depends on how much garlic we're talking about.
Yeah.
If you don't have enough that you're expecting it to last for months and months and months, then it's not going to be a big issue. But the other thing I always think, keeping things in the fridge, like tomatoes, it's anything that is chilled to that extreme, you don't get all of the flavors from it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I'm a real thing for don't put tomatoes in the fridge.
I've seen some studies that there's a chemical in the tomato that's exactly that. It changes the taste of the tomato by putting it in the refrigerator. Now, as far as the garlic, I do suggest putting garlic in the refrigerator before planting if you live in a region that doesn't get a cold winter, because the bulb needs that cold, or I should say the individual clove needs that cold to be able to form into a bulb. So if you live in a hot area and the winters are mild, putting the bulb in the refrigerator before planting for a month at least can help with that bulb development. But that's the only time I would do it.
Not really a problem for me.
Yeah, neither for me as well. Now, and so you grow garlic, right?
Yes.
And how was your garlic crop this year?
This year it was great. Last year, not so good. But I did an experiment this year. So last year I had some real issues with garlic that rotted in the ground. Not white rot, as a lot of people panicked. Just it rotted to nothing in the ground. I now know what the cause was, but as an experiment, I thought, right, okay, it doesn't seem to be draining in one part of my bed, so I grew them in containers this year just to see, and I got a fab harvest. To be fair, lots of different sizes because sometimes I got a bit over eager and I kind of packed them in there, but got lots, really happy, no problems, no rot.
That's so interesting because, again, we are upside down and completely opposite. Last year, I had one of my best garlic years ever, and I did 2 full beds of garlic. I actually planted close to 200 cloves this year, and this year has been my worst year ever. And exactly what you're saying, a lot of rot, I haven't counted, but I'm guessing I've only got maybe 35, maybe 40 garlic plants that actually survive. So, a 20% rate of success. I've never seen that. And I'm trying to figure out
This
why.
be your cold, wet spring?
Well, I think it was the cold, wet spring. I think that had a big part to play in it because I was growing some garlic in containers as well. And same thing, all of the garlic in the containers rotted. I didn't have a single one of those sprout. And so it was just a weird winter and a weird spring. And I think that made a big difference. So it just goes to show, I think each of us can now say that that's why we keep doing it, because you got the good years, you got the bad years, and hopefully the good years balance out.
As well. As much as we take notes and we journal, and I know you and I both keep an eye on weather patterns, we've both got weather stations in our garden. But that has let us say, I think you'll agree with me, that the last few years things are changing so much that I'm now not 100% confident in my own knowledge of the weather systems in my garden anymore.
That's a good point. And I've started noting new things or different things. And I think that's important for all gardeners to recognize that you can't always keep doing things the same way because the conditions change, and weather is a big part of that. But sometimes it's the source of the seed, sometimes it's the health of the soil. I mean, there's lots of other factors, and you've got to track all of that and modify what you do
Or
if you're
even
actually seeking it.
one of the biggest learning curves for me, I started off, for anyone who doesn't know our garden, when we moved here, there was no garden. It had been an older couple who had lived here. They couldn't cope, so they had what we call monoblock. They basically patio bricked over everything. There was no garden. So we created our garden. And for the first maybe 5 or 6 years, we just had no pests, no problems with anything. But as the fantastic saying goes, if you build it, they will come. So, of course, we created this abundant garden with so much greenery and things going on. So all the neighbourhood pests have went, oh, we're going there.
Yeah.
So you have to learn. I'm now having to learn to deal with lots of things I didn't deal with before. So.
And that's all part of the fun. It's all part of the journey. I actually enjoy it. I want to give a shout out to Heidi, one of our fantastic moderators, along with Jay, saying had my first tomato and basil salad with reduced balsamic vinegar with garlic I grew. Yummy. And Heidi, I've been doing that for almost a week now. I've got a video I've been shooting for months now, and I think I'm going to finish it this week with my basil. And because I've got so much ready to harvest. And I've been doing that for wonderful, wonderful days. Going out to the greenhouse, harvesting those black cherry tomatoes, bringing them in, doing a little chiffonade with the basil, and making a little salad with a vinaigrette. And I also love the balsamic vinegar. Oh.
Yeah, balsamic's so good.
And I've said this before, if my season were to end right now, I've had a successful season because I've been able to have that tomato and basil salad.
Right, we're going to have a rule now, Scott, right? And everybody who says this is a good idea, I want a thumbs up in the comments. No more British pronunciations for you. You sound weird.
Okay, just trying to be...
I'll do the UK stuff, you do the American stuff.
Trying to be polite for my guests. So, okay, it's tomato and basil. That's the salad I like to have. That's funny. So... But absolutely, it's one of those small things that we enjoy so much. And so for me, seriously, tomato and basil is all I want every year. Beyond that, it's just
how
gravy.
You know you've done it.
Exactly.
It's just like that first one. It's just like, oh.
And so how do you gauge your season? What are some of the things you look at along those lines?
Obviously the tomatoes. And now if I say tomatoes, it's going to wind you up. So tomatoes is the biggie. When you get those first ones straight from the plant and it's still warm from the sun. Oh, that's the best. For me, I'm a big pepper grower, sweet peppers. Mm-hmm. So my first ripe peppers is a big one for me. So we have a dish that we do, a shakshuka. So it's sort of tomatoes and peppers and onions. And last year, for the first time ever, we did that with everything from the garden because it was my first year growing onions. Oh, it's that sitting down. Not necessarily you eating it, but the fact that you're giving someone you love a meal from things you've grown for them.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so I mentioned it in that mint jelly video that I just did. I do that, and I'm going to be making some basil jelly as well. And I'm thinking about making sage jelly and tarragon jelly, and it's to give away. It's to share with others. Is why I grow so much that I do, because I completely agree with you. Sharing with those that you love that wonderful garden fresh flavor, it is the best. Gina McGregor is saying, I made my first heirloom tomato quiche of the year with a layer of homemade pesto. I dream of this dish in the winter. So there you go. So I would imagine part of this discussion that Gina's thinking the same thing. Mm-hmm. Success in the season because of the tomato quiche and the homemade pesto that you dream about for months.
Oh yeah, homemade pesto. Now, let's just see if this is a standard worldwide gardener thing. Have you currently got rules in place that every meal in the house must involve pesto, tomatoes, beans, lettuce? Because that's the stage we're at now.
I don't. So the only things that I'm harvesting right now are my basil and my black cherry tomatoes. I'm pretty much complete with the harvest of my Napa cabbage. I made some sauerkraut and that turned out
So
great.
yeah,
But I'm still a few weeks away from that point where I can have a harvest for every meal or at least every day. The closest I'm coming is tomatoes and basil every day for right now. But I agree with you. I love getting to that point. I wasn't planning on growing squash this year, but I went ahead and since I had all of my beds planned out and I didn't have space to grow the squash. Well, when all of the garlic didn't grow, now I had room in the beds. And so that's another thing. I'm always talking about garden planning, and I think that's a big aspect to get you to that harvest point. But when something goes wrong, it's okay to modify the plan. So I actually put in some delicata squash in my garlic bed where the garlic wasn't growing. And I'm looking forward to harvesting that. And that's one of those that is easy for, the dinners to throw into a meal every time you're cooking.
I'm quite jealous. Squash and pumpkins not an option for me. We
Because of
get
the
maybe
cool,
just you just don't get enough from the plants to make it worthwhile for the space they take up.
yeah.
So I'm always jealous when I see all these great ones people grow, but
It is good. Jen Van Brunt is asking any recommendations on keeping basil fresh until you have enough to do up a batch of pesto.
yeah, not just basil though. Think all your greens, even your lettuces. We put them in a sealable little plastic bag, so sandwich bag, with a little bit of damp paper towel in there in the fridge, and it keeps them great for a couple of weeks.
There you go. Yeah, I I do kind of the same thing. I'll wrap the base with a wet paper towel, and then I'll put them in a stock, and then wrap the base with a moist paper towel in the refrigerator, and that does help. Or what I try to do as much as possible is just wait until I can harvest a whole bunch, because it does great on the plant. If it's starting to flower, if the plant's getting a little unruly, just prune off the tips, and that's what I'll be talking about in this video that's coming up. And it splits. You actually get the branching of the basil plant, and those little teeny leaves will now grow. So you can prune a basil plant. If you have multiple plants, it works even better to get to that point where you can get one big harvest all at the same time because of how you're pruning it.
Basil just grows fantastic in my greenhouse, so I understand this because I get to the point where I have to harvest because it's just getting out of control.
Exactly, and I've been doing a lot of that recently. It's getting out of control, which is why I need to finish the video and just be done with it. Wormulus is saying the tomatoes are doing great. Prudence purple and pink brandywine. Big ones are about 1 pound a piece. I picked 10 this morning with 30 plants. Wow, I would love to be able to do that. I can't grow the brandywines like you were talking about with the squash. I've tried a couple different types of brandywine. The big beefy beef steak tomatoes, what I'm trying to say, a big slicer. And my season just isn't long enough to be able to grow those.
I can grow them in the greenhouse. I've had real success with things like Marmande, but I'm not sure about outdoors.
I tried, oh, here we go. I tried growing that tomato at the school garden years ago, and I gave up on it after one season as well. It just wasn't worth the effort. Okay, so here's a point from Mark's allotment plot. And so I'm guessing that this is some Scottish pronunciation. So I would look at that and say it's Milngavie, but it's probably pronounced Mjagafwa.
It's Mulgai.
Mogai.
Well,
Okay.
guy. So Mark
Mogai.
actually is a neighbour. So Mark is actually just just a few towns along from us. But yeah, so it's a famous one for it's just outside Glasgow, and it's one of those if you're local, you know. So even in Scotland, people get this wrong. It's very much a if you're local, you know it's Mulgai.
Okay, because there's no reason to actually pronounce an N or a V that's in a word.
Well, Scotland, for a small country, has had an awful lot of cultural influences. So we have Gaelic from the Gaeltacht, which is the sort of west coast, west sort of north. We've had the north influence. We have Doric from the northeast coast. So you see something written with what you think is English because it's English sort of alphabet, but it's
Yeah.
sometimes pronounced in. So you guys are the same. I always
Oh yeah.
get things wrong because it's maybe a Native American language
Sure.
for the name of a town or whatever, and I have no idea how to say it.
Yeah.
So
So
it's just that thing. Yeah.
one of the ones I've had family and friends that have lived in Tucson, Arizona, and Tucson is spelled
Tucson.
Tucson, Tucson, and so
Yes.
that's one of those things that
I
the
have been corrected with that one, so I now
okay.
know.
There you go. There you go. Northchester County News has one of my favorite things to do, and I'm moving in this direction. The capricci or the caprese salad with basil, tomato, mozzarella, and balsamic vinegar. I absolutely love that. But I like to do it with the bigger tomatoes. So what I'm doing
Yeah.
now with the cherry tomatoes is I cut the cherry tomatoes in half with a chiffonade of the basil and a basic garlic vinaigrette. But yes, when I start getting those bigger tomatoes, that's the way I like to do it. I like to slice them with a slice of mozzarella and the basil and the balsamic. And I actually have one of those bottles of like the really good balsamic vinegar.
Oh,
And it
yeah.
only takes a drop or
Yeah.
maybe two on that entire tomato slice. And yes,
Oh, yeah. It's
uh,
heaven.
I completely agree with Northchester County
I
News.
think this is an important thing though with your tomatoes. You've got all your little cherries, all your different colours, but the whole grown, the different sizes, the different colours, some of the mad patterns, it is a visual thing. So depending on what you're making, those big slices of colourful tomatoes look fantastic in some form of salad where you see them on a quiche or
Yeah,
a tart, something like that. They look fantastic. Your little cherry tomatoes, cut them in half and put them through a pasta or a standard cold salad. They have little pops of colour and look nice. So depending on what you're making, that's why you grow different sizes and colours and types. So
absolutely. That's one of the reasons I like to grow the Kellogg's breakfast because it's orange. And later in the season, I like to have, friends over and make that as the salad with the orange slice and the red slice and the mozzarella and the basil. So you're exactly right. The presentation is great. Now, how about
Kellogg's breakfast is not doing good for me.
that's why I wanted you to try it because I have good years and then I have a lot of bad years. So I'm
I've
anxious to
got
see how it's
one
going
on
to.
the plant, just one.
Well, we'll compare at the end of the season. Keep our fingers crossed. How about the tomato and mayonnaise and bread? Just a basic tomato sandwich. Do you do
Yeah.
that?
I just do well. You guys do meal for your kind of moisture on a sandwich. We tend to do butter here. So yeah,
Okay.
so tomato butter, little sprinkler of salt. Oh,
Yeah.
heaven! It
And
doesn't need to be
so,
fancy.
Barbara's asking a question, and I'm not sure if it was Barbara that I corresponded with earlier today because I had the same question earlier today about getting garlic and how expensive it is when you buy garlic. And so, how have you approached your growing garlic to try to keep your costs down?
Unfortunately, I don't grow enough that I have any left at the end of the season that I can then use to grow from. So I unfortunately do have to buy it.
Okay.
We did have a local supplier who was much cheaper than all the big names, but unfortunately they are no longer operating. So I'm like everyone else now. Our big place that we all get our garlic from in the UK is the Isle of Wight. but it is quite expensive. It's incredibly good quality stuff, but it's very expensive. So
And that's
unfortunately, I have no cheap solution.
okay. And that's the problem here is it's expensive. Now, I actually came across a Canadian site, and it was like Lazy Dog Farms or something like that. And they only sell in Canada, but it was like 99 cents a bulb, which
Oh,
was crazy cheap. And so I, there are places out there that are selling it cheap
yeah.
if you can find it. The problem is all of the big producers are charging, I think I was paying like $15 a pound, and a pound might be like 3 bulbs. And if I go to my local nursery, it's $4 or $5 a bulb for
Yeah,
garlic.
we're the
But
same. Yeah.
what you're paying for is the variety, because you can go to
Mhm.
the supermarket and spend
Yeah.
99 cents on a bulb and get just a generic soft neck garlic. But if you want a very specific variety, you're going to need to pay for it. What I did when I moved to this house was I had a friend that actually had some garlic, and he gave me 1 or 2 bulbs from his harvest. And then I spent 2 years basically of putting 1 bulb in with maybe 6 cloves, and then the next year saving those 6 bulbs and having 36 the next year. And that it was in that
Build
second
it up.
year that I started harvesting. I basically spent my first year just growing so that I could harvest and then grow beyond that point. And so it's one of those things that this year, if you're trying to find garlic that doesn't cost a lot, you might not be able to. And if you have the room, like I do, it can take a while, a year or two, to grow enough to get to the point that you don't need to buy it anymore. But but there really isn't a good answer unless you can
Well, I
find
guess as
someone to give it
well,
to you.
yeah, use the community. We have these fantastic communities on our channels. If you know somewhere that you can get a good supply of garlic at a good price, share, tell people, spread the word.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, because my buddy Larry was growing like 20 different varieties of garlic, and I visited him. This is 3 years ago, and 3.5 years ago now. And he had his whole basement laid out with hundreds and hundreds of bulbs of all of these different varieties, and said, "You want some?" And well, it's like,
You're like basket.
yeah, because I got a brand new garden that I haven't even started to put garlic in. And so that is, if you can get that network of gardener friends, that is a good way to do it.
Yeah.
And you can also share. So like music is one of my favorite garlic varieties. I also like Inchalium red. And so if you don't want to spend a lot of money on garlic, get a gardener friend, and you buy 1 bulb of the Inchalium red and they buy 1 bulb of the music,
And then you
and
split.
then split it next year, and then you can
Yeah.
start growing your garden that way.
Good plan. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's see. Colorblind gardener saying I have to make hot sauce each year with my peppers. Have to. I love that.
Yeah. No.
I I like to make the hot sauce, and now yeah, I have to make it every year. Other than that, sliced tomatoes with salt and sliced cucumbers with salt. A couple servings of each, and I'm good for the year. Absolutely.
Oh, cucumbers.
Yeah.
I absolutely love, like, again, just a simple sandwich with cucumber. So gorgeous. But I can't have cucumber. Kate absolutely hates cucumber. She's got that weird gene thing where she tastes things differently, and she pulls all sorts of funny faces even just at the words. So not
My
allowed cucumber in this house.
my cucumbers, I got over 50 cucumber plants of both pickling. I got 2 different types of pickling and 2 different types of slicers, and I got the first flowers appearing this week. So
Exciting
keeping my
stuff.
fingers crossed. It's exciting. Brian says the first strawberry, raspberry, grilled zucchini, grilled cherry tomatoes. The list goes on and on. Yeah,
That's true. The first strawberry.
that's I had my first strawberry, and then went for my second strawberry and the birds got to it. My third strawberry, the birds got to it. So I've only had one strawberry this year because the birds are quicker than I am. But I'm going to redo my strawberry beds next year and completely cover them so the birds can't get in. At least that's my plan. We'll see what actually
We'll see what happens.
Yeah. And so here's Gilles Leger. I'd like to think that's how it's pronounced. So I haven't been corrected. I think that's close. My favorite thing to garden is yellow beans. A huge plate of just picked cooked yellow beans for supper is a perfect meal. And I've already had 3 meals like that. Isn't that fantastic that everybody has their own meal that they are gardening for, and that's the thing that they want to do. And when they get to that point, it's actually time to kick back and enjoy, because it's just extra beyond that point.
It's the best.
Yeah. Shandy's Garden says, for the first time, I actually have pumpkin pie pumpkin growing and a jack-o'-lantern starting to grow. I'm a sucker for growing something new every year. Probably more like 75% is new each year here. Awesome. So from a percentage perspective, because you talked earlier about experimenting and trying new things, how much new do you try each year?
I always try at least 1 or 2 new tomato varieties every year. Usually I change up my courgettes or zucchinis because I've yet to find the one that's reliable. I've had great one year, not the next, so I'm still hunting for that reliable one. I change up a lot of my greens. Some years I go mad for mustards and spinach and that kind of thing. Okay. Sicken myself, so the next year I'll try something different. So I grow a lot of the same types, but I'll change up varieties. Because I mean, the guys that don't know my garden, I don't have as much growing space as maybe Scott does. So I've got 3 raised beds for my veggies in the greenhouse, and I've now got a green stock.
Okay, there you go. We'll talk about that in just a second.
That. So I'm making the best of a small amount of growing space. Okay. So I can't just go mad, but you can still have fun and try things.
I used to do probably as much as 50% new things, but because my garden is such a challenging environment, once I find something that works, I'm sticking with it. So I'm probably at about the 10% point right now.
But you have to experiment to find the thing that works.
Exactly. And this is actually the first year in quite a number of years that I am not growing pumpkin pie pumpkins and jack-o'-lanterns. And sadly, my daughter and granddaughters asked about that because I always grow pumpkins for them. But it was just so cold and I was so late getting plants in that I didn't have enough time. And I wouldn't have enough time to get the pumpkins.
That's another thing we were saying about our special meals we grow the food for in the garden. But little traditions like that, if you're growing the jack-o'-lanterns for the grandkids, these little traditions are so important as well.
Yeah, so I mean, it really is sad that I can't do it this year because it takes too long than the time I have left in my garden. But Shandy's Garden, check out, I have a video on how to make pumpkin pie from the pumpkins you grow in your garden. And it includes the recipe. It shows the whole process. Very few people have seen it because it doesn't match up with what my channel is all about, but it's a fantastic recipe. And it shows you how to harvest a pumpkin, how to prepare the pulp for processing, and how to make a pumpkin with the fresh pumpkin that you grew in your garden.
Pumpkin pie.
So I've got a video on it, and the rest, and I still use that recipe. It's a fantastic recipe for making pumpkin pie, but very few people know that because no one's seen the video. It's one of my worst performing videos I've ever done, but it's
we all
such
have
a
them,
good
Scott.
thing to do. It's funny how YouTube works because the first video I had that really took off was my sauerkraut video 10 years ago. And then I went a number of years without even making videos. And YouTube thought I was a fermentation channel. And so when I started making gardening videos, it was hard to get views on those videos because YouTube didn't see me as a gardening channel. And it was obviously sharing my gardening videos with people who wanted to ferment.
Yeah, who weren't
And
interested.
yeah, and so it
Yeah, I
took
had the same issue.
it took months and months before my channel finally was recognized as being a gardener channel. And so some of those older videos fall into that category where YouTube didn't know what kind of channel I was, and so nobody watched what
Yeah.
those videos
I
were.
think we all do that when we start though. We don't know how the YouTube machine works. So we all start and we'll do lots of random videos until we find ourselves.
Yeah.
So I think we all have interesting back catalogues.
Yes, we do. Not all the videos are as good as we'd like them to be, but they're there. So, Tennessee Nana says that they loved visiting Scotland.
Oh,
So
you didn't visit me. Where were you?
well, I'm looking forward to visiting you in the days ahead. More on
Bring an
that
umbrella.
to follow. Scotland has actually been on my list for a number of years, and I was already planning and pretty far along the planning stage of a trip to Scotland back in 2021. And
Okay.
then the world blew up and things changed. And so now I'm looking at a Scotland trip in 2024. If you know anyone in Scotland,
Mark's just up the road.
oh, okay, I'll look up Mark while I'm there. I actually probably will look up Mark when I'm there, along with others who might be in the neighborhood. So that'll be fun. That is something that's really high on my list. But I've heard, you can confirm this hopefully, that they make whiskey in Scotland.
I think Japan's your best place to go for whiskey.
Okay. Well, then I
Yeah.
guess I'm not visiting Scotland. I'll go to Japan. So more to follow on that front as well. So Jay says, when I was assistant manager of an organic farm, we grew 54 heirloom varieties of tomatoes. My favorite field lunch with random tomatoes and basil on a large bun. That sounds good.
In the sun.
The most that I've done, I think at the school I did 30 different varieties one year. And Joe from Garden State Gardener, he has like 100 varieties or 150 varieties or something like that. He's got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tomato plants. And so if you've got the space, it's one of those really fun things to do. But you can't do it unless you have like an organic farm or a big school garden or a huge plot.
So this year's my biggest amount of varieties ever. I've got, I think, 14 going.
Okay, that's what I was just going to ask. I think I'm doing 12. It's been a while since because I know you're growing some that I'm not, and I think you're almost growing everything that I am. And so there's a couple I'm growing, like the terracotta, which is growing great. And I think that may be about the only one I'm growing that you're not. Otherwise, we're pretty much in sync with a lot of the stuff that we're doing. It's just you're already harvesting, and I'm not there yet.
Yeah, but we'll see how many ripe ones I get at the end of the season.
And so, and we can look for, if you'd like to comment, I'm just scrolling through the comments. Kevin wants me to pick him up on the way to Scotland. So I've had that request before. It's one of those things. And Celthith says, went to Edinburgh and couldn't understand anyone and spent all day crying in embarrassment. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Don't need to be embarrassed.
No reason to be embarrassed. We'll have to have you on more often and give us some Scottish lessons so that we can all go to Scotland and be able to understand what's said. But that's the same as here in the States. There are states I go to and can't understand what they're saying.
Just so many different accents.
Yeah. And so, don't feel bad if you go to another country because you may have just stumbled into that one place that they say words that the rest of us would say differently, even when it's spelled in front of us. So.
And you've got to remember as well, somewhere like Scotland, there's an awful lot of the language here comes from another language.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of words we'll use that just do not make sense if you're just thinking you're getting English.
Well,
So
you've got Anglo and Saxon and Nordic and all kinds of and American and who knows what else that gets thrown in. So it is all craziness, but we still communicate. So
we do.
BEL Development says hi. First time made a live stream. Well, congratulations. Glad you could be here. We have 7 acres in our veggie garden area. We're battling with round eye mallow, which is a plant that is really hard to get rid of. It's got a very deep taproot. Any tips on mass weed management? And so for those of us with big plots and lots of weeds, particularly in a veggie area, mulch. That's why I've got a 6-inch layer of wood mulch around my fruit trees and about a 3 to 4 inch layer of wood chips in my pollinator garden to cut down on weeds. And I still get some weeds, but they're more manageable when you have a really thick mulch. So that the mulch definitely helps. But for eradicating it, look into solarization, where you take huge sheets of clear plastic and lay it over a large area and it'll kill all the plants underneath. It takes months, but if you can start with no weeds and then do the heavy mulching, it really cuts down on the weeding. And it works the same in a small garden, right? That's essentially how you're gardening in your small space, right?
Mm-hmm. It's just obviously not quite a drama for me because I'm doing everything on smaller amounts. But I mean, I think we've been lucky. We don't have any major problems with weeds except at the back. So the flower bed that's right at the back of the garden, that backs onto a park. So we have issues with ground elder and nettles that come in from there. But that's our only real issue.
But you're right on top of it, and you take as soon as you see them. I'd actually filmed and talked more about weeds in my garden when I did that video last week about the day in my life in the garden. I talked more about weeds and how I take care of them, but I cut that out of the final video because that's another big reason why I hand water. Because
then you see things.
You see things. You see what's coming in, and you can pull it before it becomes a problem. And that's...
We have a routine we do as well for that. We go around every night after work, just 10, 15 minutes, and you just go around, you look at the garden edge, you weed as you go. And it's a little bit every day, it's more manageable to keep on top of things.
Exactly.
Than if you leave it all and you're trying to do it in big amounts. That's when it gets to you and it really can get you down. It's just too much to manage.
Well, and that's just it. I've got a couple beds that are kind of out of the way. They're not those that I go to every day, and they need to be weeded, and I don't want to weed them. And now I have to devote some time out of my day to weed them, and no one likes to do that, especially me. So it's those, you're right, 10 minutes a day. And, in my vegetable garden beds, it might be only 5 minutes a day.
Yeah.
Because once you get on top of it, and if you're using the mulch, you can definitely stay on top of things. And it really can make a big difference. It's a job
nobody wants to do. And it's a video none of us want to make because nobody wants to watch it. It's like nobody likes weeding.
I do have a video on how to weed your garden, though. So you know me, I have a video
I've seen
on
it,
everything.
Yeah.
So Mayday Garden says, I have a bird seed feeder above an 18-gallon tote. The seeds discarded by the birds have sprouted. Should I consider that as a cover crop? Do you have bird feeders with seeds?
We do, yep. And they sprout everywhere.
I actually, and this is one of those videos I've been planning for a couple of years that's tied to this, is exactly that. Letting them grow to the point that they're seeding, and now you've got free bird seed.
Yeah.
Or what I end up doing, which is why I haven't made a video, is I let them grow, and then I just leave them up in the winter for the birds to eat the seeds. So, yeah, that's definitely an option. Now, I have actually moved my bird feeder, and I'm doing a better job of pulling up the plants as they sprout, because where it was before, I had room around it for those plants to grow. And yes, it did become a ground cover, and some of those plants are actually like the little sunflowers. My bird seed has sunflower seeds in it. And those sunflower plants are beautiful plants. So I like to let them grow. But the area I'm in now, I do a better job of actually treating them as weeds and pulling them up. But if you don't mind letting them grow, for my area, and I think you're probably similar, any plant that wants to grow and is doing a good job growing deserves to live.
Not in my garden.
Oh, okay.
I'm on the weeds. I like neat and tidy.
I let a lot of weeds grow because most of them are native plants, and I really like to encourage the native wildlife.
Yeah.
And it's growing.
I think that is a really good point because I get a lot of comments because our garden is super formal, super tidy, and that's how we like things. And I get a lot of comments because people want these super neat gardens, but you don't see the flip side, and that is that you need to really plan to make sure you've got things for the pollinators and the insects and what have you. Because if you're not just letting the native plants grow wherever they want, you need to be thinking about, well, what am I doing instead?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of thought and work goes into having a neat and tidy garden, not just the weeding.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the reasons I'm sharing this picture behind me now is because I took care of all the weeds and it looks nice and green. But if you look just over my shoulder on the ground, you can see a lot of the weeds that are just growing rampant on the ground. And I hacked away at all of those plants because until last week, my weeds were actually growing up to the lip of my raised beds. And
Scott, I couldn't have
I
that.
know, I just let it go. They were happy, and I
Did
was
you just-
focused on other projects. You know, I was building my gazebo. That took almost a week with all the various aspects I was doing, and then all the other gardening, and sometimes the weeds just
It
fall
is a
to the
good job
bottom
Kate
of the
is not
list.
with us tonight. She would be running in here and shouting at you for that.
Well, so I took my weed whacker and came out and just whacked everything down, and so I'm much more on top of it. I'm going to be adding some more wood chip mulch here pretty soon as well, because getting rid of the weeds to start and then putting the mulch on top is a good way to keep them under control.
It's much easier to start from a blank slate than have to deal with it afterwards.
Exactly. But, you know, when everything is weeded and everything looks good and everything is clean, it's so nice to show off a garden, don't you think?
Yeah, you should put it on YouTube. There's
an idea. And I love, for those of you who haven't been to Eli's channel In the Garden with Eli and Kate, I do have a link in the description below. And you do a lot of just going through your garden and showing what you're doing. And your garden is just so fantastic and so beautiful. And I know you use corrective lenses, so to speak, to make your garden look bigger than it is, especially your greenhouse. But it really is a small space. But in that small space, you've got a lot packed into it.
Yeah, so our garden is about 10 metres by 12 metres. So we consider it an okay sized back garden. It's not big, it's not too small. But the main issue, when we're doing YouTube, a lot of people don't realise what we have to go to make a video viewable for someone. So my greenhouse is only 6 foot by 8 foot. It's very small. At the minute, with the tomatoes and the peppers and things in there, I don't have room to actually do anything in there or move around. Yeah. So I have to use a wide angle lens so that you guys can actually see everything in there and what I'm doing. And it does mean a lot of folk online thought my garden was huge. And I have to keep reminding everyone, going, yeah, it's a normal sized garden. Yeah. You can do this.
Well, and that's at one. There are many, many reasons why I love watching your videos. But that's one reason why your videos are so good for the average gardener, because most gardeners don't have a big plot like I do. They don't have that allotment with a dozen beds. They have a much smaller space.
And it's also, for us, it's the difference between an allotment and a garden. So an allotment in the UK is an area, a piece of land deliberately portioned up to be rented by people, usually to grow food in. That's kind of the traditional thing. Yeah. But for us, it's our garden, so we grow food in it for fun, and it feeds us. But it's a garden, so we want it to look attractive because we're looking at it all the time. We're living in this space all the time. It's an extension of the house. So I grow probably more flowers and shrubs and things for
Right.
aesthetics than I actually do vegetables. But you don't have to have one or the other. It just takes a little bit of planning and a little bit of design. And of course, there's Kate's lawns because Kate loves her lawns, which I would have more raised beds, but Kate loves her lawns.
Yeah.
Again, compromise sometimes.
Compromise is important. But
Yeah.
your selection of flowers, your selection of plants, and how you put them together in your beds really is beautiful. And that's why I think people should go check out some of like your most recent one where you were being tough on your garden. I don't think you were being that tough. I am usually tougher than that, but it's a hard
Yeah, not
decision to get
everything.
rid of plants to put more plants in.
When you've only got a small space, sometimes you really have to be like, okay, this plant isn't doing what it is meant to be doing, its purpose for being here. So it has to come out and be replaced because that's valuable space it's taken up. So sometimes it's taken a few years for me to get to the point where I'm just like, no, it's happening.
Yeah.
But again, this is what you learn as a gardener as you learn to garden.
And we all do that. We spend so much time trying to get our plants to grow, and then they grow, and then they struggle, and we think we can make it survive, and it's still struggling, and we spend the whole season trying to get the
Do
plant,
everything you can. Yeah.
and it's never good enough. Once a plant is stunted and has that bad start, it'll never recover to the point that
No,
it'll give you the beautiful tomatoes or whatever
no,
it is you're
it's
trying
not
to get
worth
from it.
it. Or even if it's a shrub or a flower or whatever, your whole purpose is that end product. It's the fruit or it's the flower or whatever. And if you've got a sickly, weedy plant or a plant that's in the wrong space, you're not going to get that end product. So all that wasted time and energy, and if you're fertilizing your garden, the cost of the fertilizer and things, if
Yeah,
like us, you're mulching with compost or digging it in every year, that extra effort and time, it's not worth it.
yeah,
Sometimes you
absolutely.
just got to bite the bullet and go for it.
Yep, absolutely. And I've said a number of times that I've killed more plants than most people ever grow. And a lot of it is because of that, because of my environment at points in the season, after a hailstorm, after a freeze, after something happens, it's just not worth it. And I've ripped out whole gardens and started over again, hoping that it would be better because it's better with a new seed or a new plant than it is to try to recover the plant
Yeah,
that
exactly.
is lost.
Now, I've just noticed in the chat, Scott, I think I've just got in trouble for killing plants. Real Food Comes Dirty is shouting at me for something you might have to explain.
I'll get to that here in a sec. I wanted to give a shout out to Yankee Sister Homestead. She
Yeah.
had to leave and will catch us later. So just want you to know, Yankee Sister Homestead, that we do miss you when you're not here, and we are sure that you have more important things to do. And I hope everything goes well with that appointment. And welcome back if you're watching on replay. So let me scroll down and see if I can. Here we go. Bud saying, I really enjoy Eli and Kate's videos because their climate is very similar to mine in the Pacific Northwest. So she reminds me of when it is time to do things. And that's a good point. So the Pacific Northwest is Washington State, Oregon State, and they're right on the ocean. And they get the same basic climate that you have with that ocean effect.
Uh-huh.
And so that's a really good point. To find a channel that matches you may mean that you don't have to watch a channel from the same location. There are other parts of the world that have similar environments. So
But again, always remember, no one is exactly like your garden, not even your neighbours. So always remember your garden, you think about what you think is right for your garden. But all these other channels, it's brilliant. I learn things from Scott's channel, even though it's so different from our climate. But you take it and you think and you adapt it to you. You don't just copy.
Words of wisdom. And not that I have a problem necessarily with other gardening channels, but I think there's a lot of and some of them very popular channels who are saying this is how you do it.
And do it now.
And do it now, exactly. There's always those videos of this is what to plant in July and this is what you can plant in August. And that's true for them. But, both you and I have a burgeoning global audience with people from all over. And that's why I try to avoid doing that as much as possible, because all of
Yeah.
our gardens are different.
And it is hard because everyone wants those types of videos.
Yeah.
And I found I had to go doing them, but I spent so much time saying, now remember, this is my garden and I can do this because I've got this. And I just thought that people aren't going to watch this because it's just me panicking about someone copying me and getting it wrong.
Yeah. Well, and I'm okay if people copy me and get it wrong, because that can be a very important learning lesson. And then they go, well, why did I get it
That
wrong? And
didn't
then they
work
go
for me.
back and they'd see a different video where I talk about something different. They go, oh, okay, now I get it. So lesson learned. Idaho Gardener, thank you for that contribution. What bad bugs do Eli and Kate deal with in their area?
Now, right now, everyone's shouting at the screen because they know what I'm going to say. So the big number one problem in my garden is slugs. Major issue because it's such a damp climate. But also, now I'm trying to think what you may call them. We call them slaters. Down south, I think they call them weevils,
Oh,
pill
okay.
bugs.
So weevils are different than pill bugs.
Are they okay? I'm trying to think what I've seen people call things.
Are they the little round? Do they roll into a little
roly
ball?
polies?
Roly poly. That's, yeah.
Yeah. So we have
Everybody knows
major
roly
issues.
polies.
Yeah.
Pill bugs.
So they go hand in hand with slugs. If you have slugs and they kind of nibble at the outside of things, then the slaters will come in and finish it off. Strawberries. Big
Yes.
issue with them. Yeah. And at the minute, I have massive issues in my greenhouse with aphids.
Okay.
Because I have aubergines in there, and aubergines just seem to go, come, little aphid friends, come.
Now, do you have the ladybird beetle, ladybugs in your garden?
We call them ladybirds.
Ladybirds. Okay. Do you have
I don't
many
know
of them?
I don't. Again,
Okay.
I think because we're quite formal and we don't have a lot of safe little areas for them, and we don't grow a lot of the plants they like. So I
Okay.
see some, but we don't have a lot. Because I'm like, greenhouse, go on, guys, on you go.
The reason I ask is because at the school greenhouse, now granted it was a big greenhouse, but whenever I would see a ladybird out in the garden, I would carefully pick it up and carry it into the greenhouse. And I haven't done that yet in this greenhouse because I haven't had an aphid issue, but totally eliminated my greenhouse aphid issue because I had a population of the ladybugs that lived their whole life cycle. And you could see the larvae growing, and you could see the adults, and you could see the eggs all inside that enclosed greenhouse. So if you can find some, throw them in there.
Yeah, in doing that this sort of month or so, for the first time ever, I saw a yellow ladybird in the garden.
Ooh, be
Never
careful
seen
about
one
that.
before.
That's not a
Now,
ladybug.
No, it's okay. I know you guys get
Oh.
something that looks like them, but it's a 13-spot ladybird we get in the UK,
Oh, okay.
but they're not common. They're really not.
Okay.
So I was quite excited about that.
Yeah, we've got some bad bugs that look like ladybugs, but they're yellow. So as long as
Yeah, someone panicked when I shared the photo, and I was like, it's okay, it's okay.
Jen is saying, I told Eli this week that I first came across them last time they were on your live stream and have been enjoying them ever since.
Yep, she did indeed.
That's awesome. Maybe some of the others that are listening or watching today will join your channel. And it's different. You do a lot of how-tos, but you also do what I really like as well, which is a lot of encouragement. You show what is working, what's not working, and you give a lot of positive encouragement to people.
Just come and have a cup of tea in the garden with us.
Yeah. And so, do you want to talk about garlic braiding?
I should have stopped, Scott. I should have stopped. It was okay at that point.
And so, I know you saw my comment, but there are two different types of garlic, the hard neck and the soft neck. And you were wonderful
I was
video.
trying to braid hard neck, which is
your explanation was fantastic, and how you described how to braid garlic was spot on. If you're doing soft neck garlic, And so I've done both, and I never attempt hardneck
Life is
garlic
too
braiding.
short.
Yeah.
It
And
was that
and I
thing. It was when I got to 10, it was looking fantastic, and I should have stopped there. But the more you add, the thicker it gets, the harder it gets.
Yeah, and that's the reason. The softneck has smaller leaves, so you can weave them together to make a braid. So I'd make that not to embarrass you, but to point
No,
out that that is one of those things. I did that. A lot of gardeners do that, thinking that they're going to have that beautiful garlic braid that you see hanging in the Italian restaurant,
yeah,
and you have to choose the right kind of garlic to be able to
chasing that
to make it
Instagram
happen.
photo.
Jay saying Slaters, roly-polies, pill bugs, or wood
Wood lice,
lice
that's the other one.
have oval-shaped, flattened bottoms, but despite their many different names, they aren't actually bugs at all.
Ooh.
And so that's interesting. And so we won't go into that, but there is a definite definition of what a bug is.
And we just see
And
bug for general insects.
yeah, and there are a lot of insects we call bugs that aren't
However,
bugs.
Scott, you know what do I call general bugs? What's my word for them?
Henry, Louise,
So in Scotland, we call everything that's a small animal a beastie.
oh, beastie.
So
Okay.
a beastie. So yeah, so everything from microscopic to a mouse is a beastie.
That's good. I've heard you use that term before.
See,
CJ
we've got
Don,
it in the chat. People are getting it.
there you go. CJ Don is wondering, would buying ladybugs and introducing them to the greenhouse work? And it actually could. I'm not a big fan of buying ladybugs because they're usually harvested in a location far, far away. And they are a bit territorial, so they will try to seek their home. And, they in the States, I know you have a similar children's poem. Here it's ladybug, ladybug, fly away home.
Like we,
I think you guys say ladybird, ladybird, fly away home, right? Your house is on fire and your children are alone. Do you have that line too?
yeah, but why do we do this with children's poems?
I don't know. But it's true. If you buy the ladybugs and put them in your garden, they're going to fly away. But if you put them into a greenhouse, a number of them will probably stick
Yeah, they'll
around and
last longer, yeah.
could establish a population because they can't
Yeah.
get out or they
I just
don't know
think
how to
if my
get out.
garden doesn't attract them naturally, then it's not the place they want to be.
Exactly. So yeah, there's Garden of Whedon talking about the beasties. That's good. Uh, and so uh, generally now, because we were talking at the beginning about our tomatoes, I'm just scrolling up and looking at my screen as I'm talking. What is your thought for next year with your tomatoes? Now that you're doing more tomatoes outside, I don't anticipate that you're going to do fewer tomatoes in your greenhouse because they are so successful. But are you thinking now that you're going to change
Oh, Scott.
how you've gardened in the past?
Okay, I'll tell you a little bit because we actually have a bit of a top secret project happening, which will change some things.
Okay.
But I think I probably will change up what I grow. So I will change up the tomatoes in the greenhouse, and I will keep doing some tomatoes outdoors.
Okay.
But for more detail on that, you're going to have to click that subscribe button, folks, and come and see.
So I'll be looking forward to that. Interesting. Larry Norton is saying, respect to the point, we were talking about the different climates and how some are similar. He's in zone 5B. I'm also in zone 5B, Montana, which is a ways north of us. And they already have tomatoes that are loaded and 6 feet tall, tons of cukes and cucumbers coming on. Even the same zone can have very different situations. And so this is an important point. You in the UK don't focus on the hardiness zones as much because it's a much smaller country, much fewer zones. You've only got three,
Yeah,
I
there's
think.
much more change in our
Yeah.
small country than you guys have. Because
From
if you imagine we're tiny in the middle of the ocean with flats and mountains and things, it's just so changeable and different.
Yeah, you've got from Scotland to Wales, you have as many zones as I have here in Colorado in about 100-mile distance. And so we just have so much more. But what I stress this in a number of videos, and I've mentioned it on the live streams as well. The hardiness zone is all about the winter. It's defined by the coldest average winter temperature. And so it has nothing to do with the summer temperature. And so Larry's exactly right. He's in Montana, that's at least 500 miles for where I'm at. In zone 5B, most of the area between he and I are 5B, and I'm at 7,000 feet. I lived in Montana, and when I lived down in Montana, we were at about 3,500 feet. And so that's a bigger difference during the summer. Your elevation is much more of a factor than your hardiness zone, because the hardiness zone really doesn't matter in the summer. And so you're exactly right.
Yeah, in the UK, we have hardiness ratings we use, but we give that rating to a particular plant rather than an area. So you'll know roughly what your winter temperatures will be, and you'll be able to look at the hardiness rating of a plant to see if it will do well in your garden. Or, like I've done for a number of years, and completely ignore it.
Exactly. Ignoring it is one of those things gardeners do pretty well. And that's how we use the hardiness zone. And so like 5B is just a breakdown that tells us who live in 5B that our coldest average temperature or our average coldest temperature is minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit. And so that's minus 26 Celsius. And so everyone who lives in 5B has that average coldest temperature of minus 5 degrees or minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit. That's all it tells us. And so the plant labels will say good to zone 5, and that tells us that it can handle those cold temperatures. But you don't see anything on corn or tomatoes or peppers or cucumbers.
It's not as relevant.
Hardiness zone isn't relevant at all. Yeah, you're exactly right. And so it's the perennials. It's those plants that are coming back year after year that really have been a factor. And so Jenny's wondering about a bat box. I've been researching how to make a bat box for pest control. Do you have bats in your area?
We do, but bat boxes, now I may be wrong, but I have a feeling that things are quite protected here in terms of bats. So we have to be quite careful with things like that. So if you have bats here, you can't disturb them. If you have bats in your attic or whatever, you can't disturb them.
Interesting.
We see them in the evenings. So.
I had a bat box at the school garden. It was actually a Boy Scout, Eagle Scout project, and he and his friends built me a bat box. One of the most important things about bat boxes is they need to be very tall. And so our box was 15 feet in the air. And there are a number of plans online that you can find, Jenny, that tell how to build it, because they're very specific as to how much space they need to crawl into and to set up their house. And so as long as you follow some of those guidelines, and there's actually an organization, don't remember what it's called, but it's all about bats here in the United States and Canada, and they've got some great plans. So it's like batpreservation.com or something like that. But a search should give you the opportunity to find that site, and they've got a lot of plans. And it took a couple years, but in the second year, I saw that signs that there were bats living in our bat house. And I actually have plans at some point to put a bat house in my yard. So that is one of those fun things that you can do. They're voracious insect eaters. Flying insects.
Yeah.
And if you live in the tropics, they might actually pollinate your flowers as well.
Ooh, that's kind of good.
Yeah. So let's see, I'm scrolling down to try to... Oh, here's a good idea. I've actually been thinking about this as well. So Jeremy Ransom says, the wife made tomato sauce last night, taking the skin off and the seeds out. The skins will be made into tomato powder. Awesome. And now I have hundreds of black vermissage tomato seeds. So I forget who it was. I had a comment on my mint video where I was draining through the bag to get the liquid. And one of the comments was, you should get a food mill. And it's like, yes, I should.
Why didn't I think of that?
Why didn't I think of that? I meant to get one years ago and never did. So I actually have a food mill now. But to Jeremy's point, this is exactly how I'm planning to harvest some of my seeds this year.
Oh, good plan.
Is I'm planning on making tomato sauce. And so I'm going to put it through the food mill to separate out the seeds. And what could be easier?
That sounds like a good plan.
Yeah, so thank you for that, Jeremy, because I appreciate any time that somebody substantiates a crazy thought I have in my head. I love it when someone else is already doing it.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
I'll be off to the shops after this then.
To get your food mill?
Yeah, that's genius.
Well, I usually, we were talking about like how to harvest basil until you have enough for pesto. I do a lot of what I do as far as seed saving a little bit at a time. So if I have a tomato that I'm making into a caprese salad for the evening, then I'll harvest some of those seeds, and then the next day I'll have a different tomato with different seeds. And by the end of the season, I've got all the seeds that I'm looking for. So, it is one of those things, you don't have to do it all at once. You can do it a little bit at a time.
That is the trick of keeping gardening fun, is don't just keep everything so it's all at once. Little and often.
There you go. And Shandy's garden says we're all the same level of crazy around here. So yeah. That's good. They the craziness, I think I commented on that in a recent video. I might have cut it out, I forget. But there's so much that I'm doing this year that hasn't worked, but I'm doing it again expecting different results. The classic definition of crazy, because that's just what we gardeners do. Yeah. I'm sure I can get it right this time.
Why didn't that work?
And I usually do. It's like, well, why didn't it work? Okay, I'll change this one thing and it doesn't work. I'll change this other thing and it doesn't work. And rather than just recognize that it's just not going to work. I saw a comment earlier about lemon cucumbers. And that's the way I am with lemon cucumbers. I've got 4 different varieties of cucumbers I'm growing right now. None of them are lemon cucumber because I just haven't been able to get a good lemon cucumber crop. Go figure. But I can grow all different types of cucumbers as long as they're not the lemon cucumber. So I just don't even attempt the lemon cucumber anymore because it would be crazy to try it.
You're going to do it next year now because we put the idea in your head.
What, the lemon cucumber?
Yeah, you'll be like, just one more try.
No. I'm done with it. I did have 1 year that I harvested, I think 3 of the lemon cucumbers. And I was like, really? This is what all the excitement's about? I love the other cucumber. It tastes so much better. Maybe I have some of the genes that Kate has, where they're just...
Maybe, yeah.
I mean, it was good, but I didn't think it was so good that I had to keep banging my head against the wall every year trying to get a better crop. So I'm sure others will think, and I've had others comment to me when I bring that up, that they love lemon cucumbers and they grow a lot of lemon cucumbers. Well, it's probably because they can grow lemon cucumbers, and it's definitely better when you have success.
It goes back to sometimes you just have to say it's not worth it.
Yeah, and Jay is saying, ask me about 10 years of no results in cucumbers.
Oh.
But there's that craziness she kept doing, and she got some this year.
Some this year.
Yeah. So
well done, Jay.
Yeah. And Shandy is suggesting Crazy Gardener as a new channel. So if you're looking to branch out, there you go. New YouTube channel, Crazy Gardening with Eli and Kate. So,
I think we could make that work.
Yeah. And so we'll go ahead and end here with Bud's comment. I want to underscore Eli's comment. The most important lesson I've learned is that gardening is best done little and often for weeding, planting, and harvesting. And you're so true. So thank you for that, Bud. And I will thank you as well, Eli, for joining us today. It's always nice to have this chat and share some of what's happening in our different corners of the world.
Thank you,
And
everyone, for having me.
yes, and definitely check out her channel because there's lots of good information there, and you'll become friends with Eli just from watching her videos because you're just that kind of person. So always nice to have you here. Look forward to the next time. And of course, we will have more videos in our series as the tomatoes
soon.
get to the end of the season. If I can harvest a tomato, then I'll be able to make a video about harvesting the tomatoes that we're doing. So
we've given ourselves so much pressure.
I know, it really is. And I was telling a friend about this the other day, that because we have to do these videos, we put this restriction on each other. The last video we did where we were planting the tomatoes, I put those in the ground earlier than I wanted to, and I mentioned it in that video recently. And it's noticeable. The plants are noticeably smaller than the ones that I did the way I wanted to do it. But when you try to fit your gardening into a schedule, it doesn't always work out. So, well, good to see you here. Enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your gardening week. And I'll go ahead and say adios to the rest of you as well. I hope you have a fantastic gardening week. I hope you're getting out there. I see that for many of us, the heat wave is receding, and maybe it'll be a little bit easier for us to get out and get some of that work done. So get out there, do it. Small, simple, easy. That's a great way to approach it. And I'll be here next Monday for the same time, same chat, hopefully the same audience with more to follow. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.